Veritas Aquitus by Bones Boy 15, Chapter 6, Art of Breaking Legs. Naruto stood beside his team's bedroom door with his ear pressed against it while the rest of his team prepared for the following mornings. They were being taken on a field trip of sorts with Team Ruby, Juniper, and Cardinal. It had been a week since Nox had scared Cardinal away from the lunchroom and befriended the older Team Coffee, but during recent nights, Naruto had noticed that John, for some reason, was returning later and later with every day that passed. Anything yet? Kurama asked as he cleaned the barrel of Rikudo's rifle mode. All of the new teams were aware of Juniper's leader's bizarre new habit, and all were worried, aside from the members of Cardinal, which made all of Naruto's team suspicious. With the thanks of skilled subterfuge and vast connections, Kurama had been able to gander a few guesses as to what was going on with PJ. No, not yet. Naruto frowned. He looked over at Haku. Do it. Naruto and Haku nodded and sat on his bed with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. Haku lifted his hands up and formed a rectangle with his thumbs and index fingers. It was a theorized ability suggested by Sasuke when Haku revealed more details about his mirrors. In essence, Haku would make a smaller mirror which he dubbed a looking glass that was invisible to the naked eye and allowed him to see areas he had been to before. The three members of the team had been practicing it without Naruto to keep an eye on him when he was obviously pranking someone. Naruto soon caught on and, with news of this ability, decided to put it to good use when rumors of Cardin and John hanging out started to spread throughout the first year circle. While Kurama argued he could determine whether or not John and Cardin were together, Naruto pointed out that Kurama couldn't see what they were doing. Kurama's sensory was impressive, but it could not determine what someone was doing, just where they were. Haku's eyes snapped open, though it looked like they were focused on something distant and far away. It's as we feared. John is with Cardin and his team. Can you see what they're doing? Sasuke asked as he sharpened his sword, Amaterasu, with a block of special dust-laced clay. Haku narrowed his eyes. John seems to be writing. Cardin and Russell are laughing. Dove is meditating, and Sky just spilled something on the parchment John was writing on. What a bunch of jerks. Kurama growled as he slapped the clip of ammunition into Rikudo. Something needs to put them out of our misery. It's not that simple, Kurama. You know that, Naruto said with a sigh. The world was full of red tape and thin lines that made the black and white hard to see. He clenched his fist and grit his teeth. Damn it, if only we knew what they had on him to force him to do this. It's either something embarrassing about his family or something he did that he doesn't want anyone to know about, Sasuke said as he lifted his sword and examined the edge of the blade. Possibly the latter, Kurama said with a sigh as he set Rikudo down on the ground beside his bed and relaxed. Well, we could always go missing tomorrow and prompt Goodwitch to call for a search party. Ambush them? We're not killing anyone, Kurama, Naruto deadpanned. I never said kill. Kurama smirked lightly as he rolled his hand in the air. I said ambush. If something happens after that, well, it's out of our hands, isn't it? The last time you tried that, they somehow survived, Sasuke said pointedly. Kurama smirked darkly as he clenched his fist in the air. Yes, but this time, I won't leave them with any aura. We're not killing them. Naruto glared at the fox faunus. All right, fine. But we can't let them go on like this. They could get hundreds of people killed down the line if they continue to act like the Fourth War. I know. Naruto cut Kurama off. We're just students though, Kurama. It's Ospen and the rest of the faculty we need to convince that they're not fit to be hunters. They can put a stop to Cardin's rise before it even begins. We could do that, Kurama mumbled. Kurama, Naruto warned. I know, jeez, I'm just saying. John just left the room. Haku closed his hands and waited for a moment before he lifted them again. He's on his way down the hall. Thanks, Haku. You can break the glass, Naruto said with a smile before he pressed his ear against the door and closed his eyes. Team Nox went quiet as the leader of the four listened through the door. Naruto opened his eyes when he heard floorboards creak softly by and grabbed the handle and stopped when he heard something else. What are you? Shh! Naruto cut Sasuke off as he faintly heard the other members of Team Juniper talking. John must have been trying to sneak in again, but found that his team was still awake. There was another soft creak that Naruto arched the brow to, followed by soft footsteps that were next door. Naruto waited for another few minutes before he smiled lightly and released the door handle. What are you doing? What about the plan? Sasuke asked as Naruto walked back to his bed. Plans changed, Sasuke. Naruto simply replied as he climbed into bed and turned off his light. His teammates seemed to follow his example and turned their lights off as they prepared for bed. As he closed his eyes and prepared to reimmerse himself in the world of Ramen Land, Naruto had one final thought. You're a good friend, Ruby. Man, and I thought there were a lot of bloody trees back home, Kurama said under his breath as he, Haku, and Sasuke followed their team's leader through the red leaves forest of the Forever Fall. Naruto had decided to walk with John behind Team Cardinal, who were all very unimpressed with the area, while the odd teams Ruby and Juniper followed Professor Goodwitch ahead of them. Yes, the forest of Forever Fall are indeed beautiful, Mr. Otsutsuki, Professor Goodwitch said, her words showing that she had misheard the faunus. But we are not here to embrace nature's beauty. Professor Peach has requested that all of you take samples from the trees deep inside this forest, and I am here to ensure that none of you die in the process. Professor Goodwitch stopped walking and turned to face the students behind her, her eyes watching over them intently. Naruto grabbed John's shoulder to keep him from walking into Cardin, who hung at the back of his team, unlike the leaders of Ruby and Nox. John sent Naruto a weak, thankful smile that Naruto returned before they looked ahead as the professor continued with her instructions. Each of you is to gather 1 jar's worth of red sap. However, be aware that there are creatures of Grimm in this forest. If you wish not to die, I would strongly recommend you to stick with your teams, she said. Professor Goodwitch adjusted her glasses and let her hands fall behind her back. We will rendezvous back here at 4 o'clock. Have fun. Is she bipolar? Sasuke asked in his partner quietly. Kurama shrugged and took a jar from John when he started to hand the supplies out. Once all the supplies were dealt out and Professor Goodwitch walked off to answer a question that Blake had, Cardin clapped a hand on John's shoulder with a grin on his face. Come on, buddy, let's go. John looked to his team, who started to walk in a different direction than Team Cardinal, and his eyes locked with Pyrrhus. Just as John broke the gaze they held and prepared to go with the other four, another hand grabbed Cardin's armored wrist. I believe Professor Goodwitch said for us to join our teams. Haku's eyes were intense as he looked into the taller boys. His hands slowly clenched until the armor bound around Cardin's wrist started to groan in protest, which greatly alarmed the wearer of the metal. You are not John's teammates. Yeah, but John's offered to help my team, Cardin said quickly. When? Haku asked firmly, his slowly tightening grip not stopping in the slightest. Before we got on the bullhead, John said softly, resigned as he put a hand on Haku's shoulder. He gave the boy a weak smile. It's fine, Haku, really. The others, they said it was okay. It was a horrible lie, and everyone knew it. Haku stared at John for a moment before he sighed and released Cardin's wrist. Very well, John, but if you need any help, we'll be right there. Naruto finished from where he stood with his arms around Dove and Sky's shoulders and his head down. Both teams were sweating bullets as the crazed, whiskered blonde grinned at their team leader. Kurama and Sasuke likewise had their arms around Russell, who was nearly hyperventilating as Kurama grinned at him and his concealed eyes flashed red once more. Cardi quickly backed away from the other all-male team and scowled. Come on, Johnny boy, time's wasting. The rest of Team Cardinal was quick to follow their leader's example and disappeared into the forest in a forced calm walk with John not too far behind them. Naruto waited until they disappeared beyond a tree before he looked at Haku. Go, Kurama, Sasuke, follow from the leaves and keep me informed. Naruto's orders were soft, but heard all the same as Haku closed his eyes and backed into a mirror that formed behind him. He vanished from view just as Kurama and Sasuke disappeared into the trees. Naruto crossed his arms and stood in the clearing with his eyes closed before he looked to his left at the sounds of leaves crushed under feet. Professor, he greeted with a nod. The silver-haired headmaster nodded back and let his right arm rest behind him while the left kept a grip on his cane. He had snuck onto the bulkhead with relative ease after the students before him had visited him in the early hours of the morning prior to the departure. With a few offered testimonies and the many concerns of blackmailing brought forward, he decided to humor the young man and see if that really was any problem. Bullying was not that unusual for a school, but he had been getting reports of intense instances from a few other teachers. Important Ublik to be precise. They normally didn't question his decisions, and to have them do so was how Ospen had felt something was off. Mr. Uzumaki, are you sure this is necessary? Naruto kept his jaw square and looked up at the headmaster with a cold stare. Professor, if you let Cardinal continue to be students at Beacon, not only will it worsen the students' resolutions with one because of their blatant racism, but if they somehow, forbid, manage to graduate, your school will be blamed after the first mission where they allowed innocents to die just so they could survive. Professor Ospen pursed his lips and his jaw twitched before he sighed. I was afraid of this. Thank you for asking me before you did something. I've heard rumors of Khan Academy's final year's lessons, and I was afraid that you would act in a poorly devised manner. The goal of every graduated student of at Khan Academy is to protect the civilians of Remnant from Grim, tourists, or even other huntsmen if necessary, Naruto quietly recited from memory as he looked off towards where Team Cardinal had gone. He looked back at the headmaster with a stern glare. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the strongest, but I can read a person. I can tell what drives most people. Team Cardinal is in this for the fame, riches, and glory. If we do not stop them, and they can be rehabilitated, what then? Ospen asked. Naruto kept his gaze on the headmaster. If you let any of those four become a hunter of Remnant, the people that they let die, and people will die, will be on your head. Professor Ospen sighed for a moment before he smiled at the young man before him. You are certainly your parents' son. Your parents' son, Mr. Uzumaki. If they were still with us, they would be very proud of you. Naruto's serious look and frown vanished as he gained a small smile and looked up at the cloudless sky. I certainly hope so. The peaceful quiet between headmaster and the first-year student was broken when Haku stepped back into the clearing with a frown on his face. What did you find out? Naruto asked. Cardin's goal is revenge, Haku said as his hands clenched hard until his knuckles turned white. He tried to get John to release a swarm of rapier wasps on Pyrrha and Blake, and has mentioned that he's still trying to figure out something for us. He said, tried, Mr. Yuki. You said tried, Mr. Yuki? Ospen arched a brow. Please explain. John refused to conform to Cardin's plan. Cardin didn't take it well. He began to beat John, and the others soon joined in. Haku answered, and he glared at nothing in particular. His hands had balled into White Knuckles' fist and turned to Naruto. I'm with Kurama. We should stop this now, Ospen hummed. And why don't you? I was not taught in Khan Academy, but in one of the sister schools of Bakuo, Haku answered as he looked back at the headmaster. We do not act without our team leader's permission or word unless our lives or the lives of others are at risk. It is a lesson that is taught during the final year. We'll be revisiting that bit of information later. Naruto crossed his arms and looked at the headmaster. What's your say, Professor O? I wish I had a cup of Atlas coffee right now. Ospen sighed and looked up at the sky. Things are much easier to decide when one is fully caffeinated and awake. However, I've just discovered that one of my teams is abusing another student and plans to harm others. He brought his free hand up to rub his eyes. If I had a bunch of hard evidence before me gathered by a concerned teacher, my authority over the subject would be absolute. But alas, I do not. I cannot act on mere hearsay and testimonies with any assurances that they will be removed from the program. Haku scowled and made to speak, only for his partner to stop him. Haku gave Naruto a confused look and was shocked to see a grin on the whiskered teen's face. What can you do then? Naruto asked with a fake sigh as his smile grew. It's not like a blackmailer can be threatened. No, indeed it is not. For anyone to know that I, Professor Ospen, allowed one John Ark to come to my prestigious academy despite the fact his application and transcripts were falsified could bring about my end, Ospen sighed dramatically. If only I had a way to ensure that the information never became public, but to do so would possibly involve crude and inhumane tactics brought upon the would-be blackmailer. Naruto's grin widened. Professor Ospen, I believe that your problem will soon rectify itself. And besides, John Ark has proven to not be clever enough to trick you, so there must be a reason that the great and wonderful Ospen allowed such a student to attend his academy. If I had ever to answer that question, I would say that politics had swayed me when I informed the parents and a certain influential member of the Ark family. Ospen pressed his hand against his forehead and began to woefully walk away. Woe is me, for I am without a clear answer to my problem. If only there were a few generous students that could possibly heal my any bruises and quiet the problem for me without any permanent hard feelings. Naruto looked at Haku as Ospen disappeared back towards the bullhead and nodded. Now we can go deal with them. What was that? Haku asked in mild surprise. That was our unofficial permission to, as Nora so elegantly put it, break Team Cardinal's legs, Naruto answered as he walked off towards the area Cardinal had went to. Haku followed after him. I don't understand. Professor Ospen was putting on a show, but why? He can't outright say that he wants us to ensure that Team Cardinal doesn't try to blackmail anyone again. Naruto explained to his partner. He grinned. One has to learn how to look underneath the underneath if they wish to find the truth. Haku frowned. My academy never had those lessons. It was a recent development in Kod Academy after the terrorist attack, Naruto said softly. Haku nodded. I see. So what exactly did Professor Ospen say? Naruto held his hand up and began to list off the subjects Ospen's speech covered. 1. He can't do anything to Cardinal officially without a written proof of evidence from a teacher, so we can't get them kicked until we get some dirt on them. 2. Ospen knew that John faked his transcripts and even informed his parents and possibly someone with more influence in the Ark family. So even if John's secret gets let out, Ospen has a plan to deal with any backlash on himself, his school, or even the Arks. And finally, Ospen gave us the go-ahead to stop Cardin and his cronies as long as we don't permanently injure them. Did he really say all of that? Haku asked with a frown. Naruto nodded and Haku furrowed his brow. And what about Professor Goodwitch? Naruto chuckled. Why do you think she's really here? Our talents as hunters are being honed, not taught for the first time. We've all proved that we have the skills to take care of ourselves and each other. Didn't you notice how odd it was that she showed up this morning instead of Professor Peach? Her presence meant that Osman took our words seriously, and she'll make sure that Team Juniper and Ruby don't try to get in our way, or worse, try to help. Haku frowned. Why is that worse? Three teams ganged up on another. We'd be no better than Cardinal, and our case would be in the trash sooner than you can say burnt ramen. Naruto lifted a finger and smiled. But two all-male teams suddenly got into a fight. Boys will be boys, I suppose. Haku nodded and sent a small smile to his partner. You've got a very tactical and underhanded mind in there, Naruto. I don't know what you're talking about, Haku. Naruto smirked as he lowered his hand and quickened his walk. Tell Sasuke and Kurama that I want Team Cardinal separated from the others. Haku nodded and made a mirror in front of him that he stepped into while Naruto followed the small trail that Sasuke made with his sword. Cardin burst through the forest with the next clearing and doubled over to catch his breath. He stood up and glared at his team. Well, guys, thanks for sticking around. If Johnny Boy hadn't managed to distract that Grim for me, I'd be dead right now. Russell pointed at him as he stood up from where he leaned against the tree. You say that again? That Ursa was freaking enormous. All of those spikes. Dove shuddered and rubbed his arms. Skylark looked at Cardin with an arched brow. So, Cardin, with the plan gone to shreds, how do you plan to get back at Uzumaki and his team? I'm still thinking about it, all right. The tall boy rubbed his ruined gauntlet with his other hand and scowled. But I do know that I'm going to make that Haku freak wish he hadn't wrecked my armor. This stuff cost me an entire month's allowance to be made. I do apologize. The sudden words made the four boys freeze and dart their eyes over to the side as Haku stepped out of one of his mirrors to their left. Haku had a pleasant smile on his face as he held Snowfall in gun form towards them. I must request that you do not try to run. Or else what? You going to shoot us with that puny gun? Puny thing? Skylark asked with a sneer as he and his teammates drew their weapons. He twirled his collapsed halberd in his hand and smirked at the feminine boy. You know, I always wanted to find out if you were actually a chick despite your words. We can find out right now, Russell said with a grin as he lifted up his daggers. If not, well, then you're just a cross-dressing freak. That's just sick, Dove said with a grimace while he aimed his short sword at Haku. Always almost as disgusting as sharing a room with a faunus. Cotton and the others chuckled at Dove's burn. Nice one. Their smiles fell as a slow clapping came from behind them. Team Cardinal turned and faced Kurma as he stepped out from behind a tree. Ha 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 hoo 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 he. Kurma's grin widened as his unnerving and sarcastic chuckle put the four bullies on edge. What's wrong, Dove? No more jokes? He tisked any disappointment as he pulled his staffed rukudo formed from where it rested in his palm. Kurama tightened his grip, and the blades that dangled from the rings aligned at the top to make the spear mode. That's a shame, and here I thought you were the comedy group. You're always making such witty and clever jokes about us, Faunus. You, stay back, Russell warned as Kurama stopped on the edge of the clearing opposite Haku. He remembered passing out in the forest, and it was not an experience he wanted to go through again. There's just two of them. Russell, relax. Cardin chided his partner with a scowl before he smirked at Kurama and tightened his grip on his mace. I've been waiting to knock that smile off your face since we first met. Then once we're done with you two, we're going to find that pretty boy partner of yours and kick his ass too. I assume then that you would be I assumed then that you would mean me. Cardin's smirk fell and color drained from his teammates' faces as they turned to Sasuke, who stood on the edge of the clearing directly between Haku and Kurama. His weapon was in its sword form, and what looked like black lightning arched around his hands and up the blade. Threatening to beat up two of my teammates, that's dumb, Sasuke said slowly as he held a Mataratsu in front of him. He smirked at the four. However, it's far from the worst mistake you made today. None of the members of Team Cardinal could speak before the space opposite Sasuke was occupied as the team leader of Team Nox stepped from the forest while he cracked his knuckles. Naruto grinned at the 14s and began to loosen his joints. You see, Cardin, your biggest mistake was thinking that you could get away with not only blackmailing one of our friends, but trying to hurt or possibly kill the others. Cardin's eyes widened and his team backed into each other, each looking at different members of Team Nox. Kurama's eyes glowed brightly behind his sunglasses as he met the gaze of the shuddering Russell Thrush. Sasuke smirked and lifted his now crackling Amaterasu towards the terrified Dove Bronzewing. Haku had dropped his smile and had stared intently at Skylark with the snowfall shifting into its waveform. Now, Naruto directed his attention to Cardin, and the whiskered blonde punched his face towards to make his Stormbreaker unfold around his hands. I believe I told you that we'll fuck you up. And believe me, we will. Kurama grinned as he held his hand out towards them. Russell's eyes began became the size of dinner plates, and the faun's grin widened. His predator instincts were starting to kick in, and he awaited eagerly to be released from his leash. But first, we have to make one thing clear, Sasuke said as the sky started to darken overhead, and Dove's arms began to shake as they weakly held his sword up. You will leave John Arc, the rest of Team Juniper, and Team Ruby, and any faunus on campus alone. Haku cracked a snowfall and took a single step forward, which made Skylark swallow and lift his halberd. Or else what? Cardin either bravely or stupidly asked as he held his mace towards Naruto. Naruto's smile widened. Or we'll finish what we started today. The three other members of Team Nox moved forward, and before any members of Team Cardin could process what Naruto had said, they moved at once. Their attacks nearly choreographed with how well timed they were. Haku's face was frighteningly blank while he faced down Sky with a small crack in the air. Snowfall had suddenly wrapped around Sky's waist before the blue-haired boy could realize that Haku had moved. Haku's eyes flared with rage before he pulled back and flung Sky towards him. Haku turned and let Sky fly past him to crash through a few branches and land on his face in a brush. Another pull jerked the blue-haired teen from the ground and slammed Sky's back into a tree. A third and final pull on Haku's part peeled Sky off of the tree and into a well-prepared bush punch that knocked him out cold. Haku stared down at the boy with thinly veiled anger in his eyes and twisted his wrist to unwind his weapon from Cardin's waist, nearly frothing at the mouth when he was given the silent go-ahead. Kurama charged at Russell with his hand still outstretched, his hand wrapped around Russell's throat, tightening slightly as he rushed the the punk-like huntsman in training into a tree back first. Russell let out a choked cry of pain as the back of his head slammed into the bark. Kerma grinned at the sound and took in the fear that remained Russell's eyes. So Kerma was a bit of a sadist. Sue him. It was part of who he was. With Rikudo spear mode, Kerma stabbed the tip into Russell's collar and he threw him into the air. Kerma watched with a disturbingly wide smile as he gleefully witnessed Russell land atop Sky's steel form with a loud smack. The faunus' tail flickered happily as the two teens groaned on the ground. With vindication fueling him, Sasuke rushed forward and locked blades with Dove. Amaterasu's curved blade allowed Sasuke to control the struggle, but Dove was no slouch in swordplay as he held strong despite the disadvantages. Their eyes met, a dark pair filled with fear and a pair of black orbs darker than the night sky. Sasuke smirked and Dove paled. There was a soft boom of thunder before Dove recalled what Sasuke's semblance could do, as shown in countless fights. Though everyone on their grandmothers knew Sasuke abused his semblance, no one had yet to find a way to beat him in a class spar. No one aside from his teammates, that is. With this information in hand, Dove could only scream in agony when he was electrocuted, and all the while Sasuke continued to smirk. The smoking dove was then dragged over to the other two and piled on top of them. This was watched by the three defeated team's team leader. Cardin tightened his grip on his mace and began to back away. He stopped his retreat and turned around when he was shoved in the back by the other team's leader. My team just beat yours in 5 seconds flat. Naruto had an intense gleam in his eyes. The gleam became much more prominent as he began a slow approach. Cardin retreated a few steps, his body trembling, but never once took his eyes off of the whiskered teen while he spoke. Sky's back is most likely bruised, his ribs possibly cracked, and his nose is definitely shattered. Russell's head is probably throbbing, and he's probably not faring well from the massive fall he went through. Dove is, well, he's currently experiencing the reason why your parents told you that you're not supposed to put a penny into a live socket. You can't get away with this, Cardin muttered. His father would. No, Cardin was not going to fall that low. He was bigger than Naruto. The blonde looked like a swimmer, while Cardin was a knight. Cardin was trained in combat by the finest family trainers, and Naruto was a known orphan, a nobody. He tightened his grip on his mace, and he lifted it up over his head. A rage filled Cardin, and he ignored the groaning members of his team. You won't get away with this! Naruto showed no surprise as the other team leader tried to assert himself over him. In fact, he almost looked like he had planned for it. If the small quirk of the lip was anything to go by, Cardin saw red and dropped his mace down. Naruto merely let his arm hand shoot up, and he caught the mace as it fell. Cardin grit his teeth and tugged his weapon back, but it did not budge. Naruto's eyes locked with Cardin's before they looked to the mace in the blonde's grasp. Cardin's burning rage was doused by a chill of fear that overcame him when Naruto crushed the mace in his hand. Frightening, isn't it? But do you want to know what's really scary? Naruto let a small smile cross his face as Cardin looked back at him. I'm not even trying. Cardin's eyes were wide as saucers at the claim. That mace was arguably made of the strongest metals used when crafting weaponry, but the blonde just crumpled it like it was tissue paper. Even if it was bravado, it took a hell of a lot of strength to do what the whiskered blonde had done. If Naruto could do that to metal, then what could he do to the human's body? The question made all of the blood in Naruto and Cardin's face drain away. Now, like we said before, stop bullying our friends, or else we will finish what we started, Naruto warned before he drove his left fist into the taller boy's stomach. A sharp gasp escaped Cardin as he folded over from the blow and released his mace's hand. He stumbled back and fell to his knees, his armor wrapped around his stomach. Air failed to return promptly, and strangled sounds left Cardin's mouth. He faintly heard them and barely saw his ruined mace. His pride and joy land in front of him. Naruto grabbed Cardin by the collar of his chest plate and lifted him up to look him in his dazed eyes. I don't know if you can still hear me or not, but on the off chance you can, know that we're watching you, Cardin Winchester. Know that you and your team lost without even a sliver of a chance. Naruto paused for a moment before he leaped in and whispered into Cardin's ear, I know that I'll And you, if you ever try to hurt my friends again. Naruto pulled away to find that the boy's eyes had fallen shut and that his breathing had evened out. He gave a look of disgust to the unconscious teen before reluctantly heaved him over to his shoulder. Naruto knelt and grabbed Cardin's mace while Haku, Kurama, and Sasuke similarly picked up the other three members of Team Cardinal and their weapons. With everything all set, Naruto led his teammates back to the rendezvous point, going over the covered story as they did. Whoa, what happened to them? John asked as Team Nox walked out of the woods with Team Cardinal on their shoulders or in their arms. Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he walked forward with Cardin's body draped over his shoulder, his teammates not far behind him. We found them fighting off a few Beowulfs, he said. They had decided on making themselves out to be saviors while also making Team Cardinal look somewhat respectable. This was only a warning after all. Real humiliation and shame would come if Team Cardinal decided to act out again. Cardin's mace got crushed and the others got a bit winded. Poor Russell was pinned against the tree with a claw around his neck before Haku saved him. And being the good guys we were, we carried them back after they passed out. "And your jars?" Professor Goodwitch asked. She adjusted her glasses and gave a disapproving look at Haku, Sasuke, and Kurama while they walked past towards the waiting bulkhead. Naruto rubbed the back of his head with his free hand. "They sort of played the part of a needed sacrifice to ensure that we got away. I'll apologize to Professor Peach when we get back." "I see." Professor Goodwich's eyes narrowed slightly. She let out a soft sigh and her gaze relaxed. "Very well. Set him in the bulkhead with his team, and we'll have some faculty carry them to the nearest office when we return." Naruto gave a two-handed salute and followed after his team, who were followed by a reunited John, Nora, Pyrrha, and Ren. The sight of Team Juniper brought a small smile to Naruto's face. His attention was drawn away from Team Juniper when Yang bumped her arm into his. "Wow, Whisker Boy, Guardian's got to be at least 300 pounds with all that armor on, and I can't lift that much without my semblance active. Even aura enhancement can't help you that much." Yang gave him an apprehensive once over, while her lips pulled up into a small smile. "Someone's a lot stronger than they look, huh?" "Ah, this is nothing." Naruto waved off her praise with his free hand while he adjusted Cardin on his shoulder. "When I was on a field trip back home, my teacher made me carry a captured Ursa back as punishment for running off without supervision. Let me tell you, those things may dissolve into wisps of smoke, but they are not. Like, I bet that really put the oomph in your pounding." Yang grinned as she elbowed her fellow blonde. "Yang, seriously?" Ruby, who was right behind them, along with the slightly smirking Blake and the amused but trying and failing to not show it Weiss, pulled her hood over her head and clapped her hands over her ears. As silver eyes glared up from behind the edge of the red fabric into lilac eyes. "I so don't want to hear that." "I was talking about fighting, Ruby," Yang said as Naruto laughed. The buxom blonde grinned back at her little sister. "Such a little perv you've become. Geez, what would Dad say? That it was your fault?" Ruby shot back with a small flush on her face as she glared at the two blondes. She grumbled to herself with her sister, teammates, and Naruto laughing at her outburst. "Enough fooling around. Everyone on the bulkhead," Professor Goodwitch instructed as she strode back past them. As Naruto boarded, he locked eyes with her and she gave a very brief nod to him, which made Naruto's smile become a tad bit bigger. "Well, it would seem that because of the Beowulf's attack, Team Cardinal needs at least 2 more weeks of rest, and Skylark may need more intensive therapy for his back." Professor Ospin took a sip of coffee as he looked at the 4 teens that stood before him. "It seems as though Team Cardinal owes you their life, as hard as it was for them to admit it. Just glad we could help some fellow huntsmen, Prof. O." Naruto grinned widely while Kurama snickered and Sasuke smirked. Haku blinked and furrowed his brow as he tried to figure out what was really said. A second passed before Haku's eyes widened and a smile crossed his eyes. In the reflection of Ospin's glasses was where Haku found the answer. Strewn across the headmaster's desk was a mess of papers, with a few of them having backwards written words that were hardly noticeable unless one looked. Together, the words formed a small message. Cardinal silenced. Investigation begun. Good job. If that's all, then I believe I can file these injuries off as a grim attack and call it a day. Osmond smiled slightly at the team before him. Good job, boys. I can see you all are destined for great things and very protective. Now, off to bed with you. Tomorrow the weekend begins, and one should always use that time wisely. You got it, Prof. O. Naruto gave a two-fingered salute before he led his team out of the headmaster's office. Once the door was shut, Ospin sat back and sighed slightly. He relaxed in his chair for a moment before a smile spread across his face. He certainly is his father's son. The headmaster's words were met with a chuckle. Isn't he? I think he's more like his mother, if I had to be honest. A tall man stepped slightly out of the shadows. The man cupped a hand on his chin and tilted his head back as he looked up. I thought we had taught him better than that. He didn't even bother to check to see if the room was clear before the debriefing began. He is still young, and his guard never dropped. Besides, if I believe he realized the moment that I started to speak that something was amiss, Osmond said with a smile. He lost it though, and his hands interlaced in front of him. Have you any new development, my friend? Something is on the move. The tall man said with a frown on his face. I don't know if it's the Fourth War, Roman Torchwick's mysterious faction, or the White Fang, but something is coming. They need to be ready, Ospen. Not just those boys, but all of your students. They are going to be drawn into action, and soon. Before you say anything, the time for letting the young act young is coming to a close. We need them to be protectors, hunters, and possibly even soldiers. He dropped a file on the desk, and Osman barely took a moment to look at the black cardinal scrawled across the vanilla file. Osman didn't bother to look at it, as he knew by the cardinal red tag what it contained. He was the one that had offered it to his guest. After all, those boys are not soldiers of Revenant, protectors of people, or even hunters to counter the forces of Grim. They are hot-headed, arrogant, cowardly, greedy, and selfish little bastards. The man leaned forward, glaring into Ospen's calm eyes while he pressed his fist into the desk. How did these bastards get into your school, great and powerful Ospen? I do not know. Ospen took a sip of his coffee and set the mug down atop the file. He looked up and met the hard gaze of his guest. But believe me, they will not be here for much longer. It will take time, but we will find a way to legally plunge them from the system. Make sure of that. The man's gaze became piercing. Remnant doesn't need any more falls, torchwicks, or weasleys on the loose. That we can agree on. Ospen nodded firmly. He folded his hands together and glanced up at the other occupant of the room. Any word on their availability? The guest seemed to lose the tension in his shoulders. He backed away and smiled. Ah, the KAG will be more than ready for this mission. Good, Osmond said with a similar smile on his face. It was nice to see you again, my friend. I'm always up for a visit, Os. The figure waved before he slipped into the shadows and disappeared. Osmond sipped his coffee and looked at the file that had been replaced when he wasn't looking. His smile widened as he flipped it open to find a biography along with the picture, and he chuckled. My, so many interesting people come out of those academies. Very interesting indeed. Coco, I swear, if you don't let me go, I'm going to prank you so hard. Naruto gagged as his self-proclaimed sister hugged him tightly. He sent a glare to the rest of his team and the other members of Team Coffee for letting this happen. The older students had stumbled across Team Nox shortly after they left Ospen's office, and the leader had quickly glommed her younger brother. I'm so proud of you, Coco said for the umpteenth time, saving the bad bullies from a group of Beowulfs after they tried to blackmail another rookie. Such a good little boy. Oi, I'm not little. Sasuke smirked as he used his scroll to record the duel. I'm so holding this over his head forever. Agreed. Kurama snickered while the other giggled next to him. Haku looked at the fox, who watched the interaction with a small smirk on his face. I'm glad you got my message. Naruto was getting a bit fat-headed. The fox merely waved him off. The older teen was a man of a few words. Coco really does care about him, Yatsuhashi said softly as he smiled at the sight of the two siblings. We have a few missions coming up, and she's trying to hide it, but she's worried about you all. Professor Ospina has been acting far stranger than usual. His disappearance this morning put our teachers on edge. Haku arched a brow. So only Professor Goodwitch knew? Interesting. Haku, help me. I'm your partner, damn it! Haku looked at Naruto with a small, amused smile. The whiskered leader was caught in a noogie from Coco and struggling to escape while the older girl laughed. Say it. Say you love your sister. Never! Naruto climbed to the roof of the dorm in order to escape Coco's grasp, using an access catch that he discovered while he was playing a few pranks. As he hid, he kept a close eye on the solemn John when the other blonde walked out onto the balcony and stared off at the horizon. After Naruto learned that the boy had saved Cardin from an Ursa that attacked the two and a message from Yang, who was curious about his sudden disappearance, his opinion of his fellow blonde leader rose significantly. Even though Naruto still felt he was the cooler of the two, Naruto still smiled as he sat on the ledge, his gaze down at the balcony below. John and Pyrrha's friendship was fixed, and Naruto had to cover his mouth to keep from giving away his position. Deciding that this was a moment he shouldn't be spying on, Naruto rolled back and kept to his feet. Good call, puke boy, Naruto mused as he walked to the roof access with a smile. On his face, he kicked the access panel open and then tilted his head in thought. Guess it's like a car, she said. The road of life has many twists and turns. End of chapter 6.